The summer of 1994 in Waupaca County, Wisconsin, was one of those quiet, postcard-perfect seasons that locals often took for granted. The fields rolled gently into dense patches of pine and oak, and the long gravel roads stretched towards sleepy farmhouses and family-owned businesses. In early September, as the warmth of summer began to fade into the coolness of fall, Labor Day weekend brought with it a special kind of rhythm. Families gathered for cookouts, children played outside well past dusk, and in the small communities scattered across the county, everyone seemed to know everyone else. For the Jones family, Labor Day weekend was more than just a holiday. It was a chance for 12-year-old Cora Jones to spend time with her grandmother. Cora was the kind of child who left an impression wherever she went, bright-eyed, friendly, and impossibly curious. She loved riding her bike down the country lanes, often waving at neighbors as she passed. Her parents trusted her. In a place like this, danger wasn't something that lived in the minds of people day to day. On the afternoon of September 5th, Cora asked if she could take her bike out for a ride. It was nothing unusual, just a short trip along the familiar stretch near Sanders Road, the same area she'd cycled countless times before. She set off wearing her favorite clothes for a ride, pedaling into the late summer sunlight, her tires crunching over the gravel. Her grandmother watched her disappear down the lane, expecting she'd be back within the hour. But as the afternoon wore on, there was no sign of Cora. The sun began to dip lower in the sky, shadows stretching across the roads. What began as mild concern slowly grew into unease. Her grandmother walked the road, calling her name, expecting at any moment to see her granddaughter pedaling toward her with an easy smile. But there was only silence. Around 5 p.m., a man riding through the area spotted something odd. A small bicycle lying on its side at the edge of Sanders Road. It looked as though it had been left in a hurry, the kickstand unused, one handlebar slightly twisted. He recognized the bike. It belonged to Cora, but there was no sign of her. By 6 p.m., her family had called the local sheriff's office. Officers arrived, questioning neighbors and combing the area. At first, the search was small, just a handful of deputies and volunteers fanning out along the roadside. But within hours, it became clear this was more than a simple case of a child losing her way. Cora's bicycle was the only clue. There were no footprints, no obvious signs of a struggle, no indication she had walked away on her own. Word spread quickly through the tight-knit community. Neighbors brought flashlights and began searching fields and barns. Some took boats out on nearby waterways, dragging the shallow edges for any trace of the girl. The Waupaca County Sheriff's Department requested assistance from the Wisconsin State Patrol, and before the night was over, the FBI had been contacted. This was no longer just a missing child. It was a suspected abduction. In those first tense hours, the Jones family clung to hope. Missing children were sometimes found safe. Maybe she'd gotten lost. Maybe someone had picked her up and would bring her home. But beneath the hope was an unspoken fear that no one wanted to give voice to. In the quiet corners of Wisconsin, evil could still walk unnoticed. As the first night turned into dawn, the search widened. Dozens of volunteers scoured the area on foot and on horseback. Helicopters circled overhead, their spotlights sweeping the fields. Roadblocks went up in and out of Waupaca County, with officers stopping cars and trucks, asking drivers if they had seen a little girl on a bicycle the day before. Cora's parents stood by helplessly as strangers combed through the countryside, her school picture now printed on flyers that were being tacked to telephone poles and gas station doors. The image showed a smiling, lively girl who looked as though she could never be anything but safe in her hometown. But someone in that town, or someone passing through, had taken her. And as investigators would soon learn, the man who had crossed her path that sunny afternoon was far from a stranger to violence. By the morning after Cora's disappearance, the quiet roads of Waupaca County looked more like the staging ground for a military operation than a rural Wisconsin neighborhood. Squad cars lined the intersections, volunteer vehicles were parked haphazardly along the ditches, and men and women in reflective vests moved in coordinated sweeps through the tall grass and pine thickets. The urgency was palpable. Authorities knew that in abduction cases involving children, the first 24 hours were critical. After that, the odds of finding a child alive dropped sharply. The FBI quickly deployed agents specialized in child abductions, Working alongside state troopers in the Waupaca County Sheriff's Department, they brought dogs trained to pick up even the faintest human scent. The dogs were led to Cora's bicycle, still lying where it had been found the evening before. The animals sniffed along the roadside, circling in slow loops, but the scent trail led nowhere. Investigators suspected that whoever had taken her had forced her into a vehicle, wiping away any chance of a trail. Local residents searched every barn, every abandoned building, every wooded clearing they could reach. Farmers opened locked sheds, fishermen scanned riverbanks, and hunters checked remote deer stands. Neighbors who had known Cora since she was born spoke in low voices, unable to process the idea that one of their own could vanish in broad daylight. Despite the massive effort, days passed with no sign of her. The mood in town shifted from frantic hope to a grim sort of waiting. Parents kept their children indoors. The familiar rhythms of small-town life were broken. Then on the 5th day, after she had last been seen alive, the search ended in the way everyone had feared, but no one wanted to believe. 75 miles north of where Cora's bike had been found, in Langlade County, a man walking near a remote gravel road spotted something in the weeds. At first, he thought it might be a discarded mannequin, an awful, common mistake in tragic cases. But as he got closer, the truth sank in. He saw the small, still form of a child. Her clothing was disheveled, her skin pale against the green and brown of the roadside grass. Law enforcement was called immediately. The area was sealed off, deputies marking tire tracks in the dirt and photographing every detail before the body was moved. The confirmation came quickly. It was Cora Jones. The autopsy that followed shattered any remaining hope that her disappearance had been the work of a confused or misguided person. Cora had been kidnapped, sexually assaulted, beaten, and stabbed. The final cause of death was strangulation. The injuries told a story of violence and cruelty that was almost too much for even seasoned investigators to read in the coroner's report. In the Jones household, the news came with the kind of force that takes the breath from the room. Her parents, who had been clinging to the possibility of a rescue, now faced the reality that their little girl's final hours had been ones of unimaginable fear and pain. The community responded with a mixture of grief and rage. In Waupaca County, church bells rang in mourning. In Langlade County, locals who had never met Cora brought flowers and stuffed animals to the roadside where she was found. For investigators, grief had to take a back seat to determination. Whoever had done this had been brazen enough to snatch a child in daylight, confident enough to drive her far from the abduction site, and cruel enough to end her life in such a brutal manner. This was not a first-time offender. This was someone who had done this before or was willing to do it again. The next steps would take the investigation deep into the dark history of a man whose name had already crossed police desks before. Someone who had left a trail of violence stretching back years. And now all evidence pointed toward him. From the moment Cora Jones's body was found, the investigation shifted into overdrive. The FBI's behavioral analysts joined the Wisconsin investigators, and the picture they painted was chilling. The nature of the abduction, the distance traveled, the brutality of the assault. This wasn't the work of an impulsive attacker. This was someone with experience, someone who had done this before and who understood how to cover their tracks. The autopsy yielded one key lead: DNA. Although DNA profiling in 1994 was still a relatively new law enforcement tool, it had already begun transforming criminal investigations. Samples were collected and rushed to the state crime lab. But as forensic teams worked, detectives also began digging into past crimes that bore similar hallmarks. That search kept circling back to a name the Wisconsin criminal justice system knew all too well: David Spanbauer. Spanbauer was 53 years old, and his history was a grim catalog of predatory behavior. He had spent years in and out of prison for sexual assaults and burglaries. He had a particular pattern: targeting young girls, often in rural or small-town settings, using charm or force to gain control before assaulting them. Each time he was released from prison, the violence seemed to escalate. What disturbed investigators most was that Spanbauer was already on parole at the time of Cora's abduction and murder. Despite his extensive record, he had managed to live quietly enough to avoid immediate suspicion. But tips began trickling in after Cora's case hit the news. Reports of a suspicious vehicle seen in the area that matched one he was known to drive. Detectives began building a case. They traced his movements over Labor Day weekend and found he had been in Waupaca County on the day Cora vanished. Witnesses reported seeing a car matching his near Sanders Road not long before the bicycle was discovered. One man remembered a driver staring intently at children playing near the road. His description matched Spanbauer's face almost exactly. The breakthrough came when investigators obtained a warrant to search his residence. Inside, they found items linking him to multiple unsolved sexual assaults. Most damning of all, the DNA evidence from Cora's body matched Spanbauer's profile exactly. When confronted, Spanbauer didn't try to deny the charges. In fact, his confession went far beyond what detectives had expected. He admitted to abducting Cora from her bike, forcing her into his car, and driving her to a secluded location nearly 75 miles away. There, he assaulted her, stabbed her, and strangled her before leaving her body in Langlade County. But Cora wasn't his only victim. In a cold, almost detached tone, Spanbauer also confessed to killing 2 other young girls in Wisconsin, cases that had haunted investigators for years. He admitted to a string of burglaries, sexual assaults, and attacks that spanned decades. The picture that emerged was horrifying. David Spanbauer had been a predator in plain sight for most of his adult life. Each time the justice system released him, he returned to his old patterns, and each time the violence escalated. By 1994, he had become the embodiment of every small-town parent's worst nightmare. A killer who could strike without warning and vanish just as quickly. With his confession recorded and the DNA evidence secured, prosecutors knew they had more than enough to put him away for the rest of his life. But the trial would still come, and the Jones family would have to sit in the same courtroom as the man who had taken their daughter in the most brutal way imaginable. When the case against David Spanbauer reached the courts, the outcome was never in doubt. The DNA evidence alone was enough to seal his fate, but his own confessions had gone even further, laying bare not only the murder of Cora Jones, but also 2 other homicides and a string of sexual assaults spanning years. For Cora's family, the legal process was an emotional minefield. Every hearing meant seeing him again, the man who had stolen their child. The courtroom was often heavy with silence, broken only by the voices of attorneys or the shuffling of papers. Cora's parents sat through testimony that detailed the final hours of their daughter's life. Testimony so graphic and cruel, it made even seasoned reporters turn away. In December 1994, Spanbauer entered guilty pleas to 18 felony counts, including 3 counts of first-degree intentional homicide, multiple counts of sexual assault, and burglary. His guilty pleas spared the families from a drawn-out trial, but they also denied them the chance to see him face a jury's judgment. When the judge pronounced his sentence, 3 life terms plus 403 years in prison, it was clear that Spanbauer would never walk free again. There was no possibility of parole. Reporters noted that Spanbauer showed little visible emotion as the sentence was read. His only comments to the court were brief and detached, a final insult to the grieving families who had come to hear some kind of remorse. There was none. In Waupaca County, the sentencing brought a mixture of relief and frustration. Relief because the man responsible was locked away for good. Frustration because many felt the system had failed long before Cora's murder, that a man with such a violent history should never have been free to begin with. Spanbauer's record, they argued, was proof that dangerous predators could slip through the cracks, even in small towns where people still believed they knew their neighbors. For the Jones family, life after the sentencing was a slow and painful process of learning how to live with absence. Cora's room was left as it had been. The posters still on the walls, the books still on the shelf. Her bicycle, the same one found on Sanders Road, became a haunting reminder of a day that had started like any other and ended in tragedy. In prison, Spanbauer became just another inmate, serving time in a maximum security facility. His notoriety in Wisconsin remained, but in the outside world, attention shifted to other crimes and other trials. Inside the prison walls, his health began to fail, and in 2002, just 8 years after his sentencing, David Spanbauer died at the age of 61. His death brought no closure for the Jones family. In interviews, they said what they truly wanted was never going to be possible. To have Cora back, to have never let her ride down Sanders Road that afternoon. But they also hoped her case would be a warning. They wanted people to understand that predators can exist anywhere, even in the most peaceful of places, and that justice systems must be strong enough to keep them from harming again. Today, the story of Cora Jones is remembered in Wisconsin not just as a tale of loss, but as a rallying cry for protecting the vulnerable. It is a reminder that in the space of a single sunny afternoon, lives can be changed forever, and that justice, while necessary, can never truly erase the harm done. Cora's name lives on in her community, in the memories of those who knew her as a bright, joyful girl, and in the quiet roadside where a pink bicycle once lay, marking the spot